the retreat workshop. If you expected to be in the Justice and Witness workshop, you may need a retreat, and I invite you to stay, or we would invite you to make your way to the chapel. If you have not had the opportunity to visit the chapel yet, we encourage you to do so. It's down by the bookstore. Look for the cross that is in the hallway, and you will find your way. And this afternoon, Marcia, would you be willing to, Marcia is going to be talking about what it's like to take a 2-minute or a 20-minute retreat. Carol will share with you the power of journaling and reflective work with Lectio Divina. And then Linda will be sharing with you a prayer exercise with mandalas.
Maybe that was a bad idea.
We'll be sharing with you a list of retreat sites, spiritual practice of silence, and Sally will be sharing with you befriending our distractions.
Okay, so I have to say something. It is so distracting over there. There's somebody right on the other side of the stage.
Bang on it.
So,
no, would you like me to go over, or?
I just wondered if anybody else was feeling that too. We're listening to them speak through the...
It'd be hard to...
So is there a way for us to work with that?
Why were we moved across the hall?
Yes, we do, but we're not going to take the time to go there right now.
Really practice letting the chairs because you know when you're in spiritual retreat, you have to tune out.
I think when we start talking, I won't be paying as much.
It's fine. My thing is on distractions.
Yeah.
And the adjective is befriending distractions. So just kind of bless them as we listen. But I really wanted to check in with people here because I'm very...
And we may be distracted.
It's non-distracting here, and
They're outside the door. Oh, you can look at mine.
And you could also move your chairs this way. We don't have to be in a full
Got this.
and
I will get mine afterwards. There's the next one. I will get mine. You can write mine. Because I have to do this.
And so I would invite, as you're getting yourself settled in, and we will talk about the distractions at the end, we will move into those distractions at the beginning. I would like to invite Marcia to begin.
Welcome. Glad you came this afternoon. I'm talking to you about what you can do in a 2-minute or 20-minute retreat, but first, why do it? In a university commencement address several years ago, a CEO spoke of the relationship between work and other. He said, imagine life as a game in which you're juggling 5 balls in the air. You name them: work, family, health, friends, and spirit. You've been keeping all these balls in the air. You need to understand that work is a rubber ball. The other ones are made of glass. If you drop them, they will be irrevocably scuffed, marked, nicked, damaged, or even shattered. They will never be the same. We need to strive for balance in our life. So retreat, whether for just a couple of minutes or 20 minutes, or whether you have the luxury of a longer time, is essential for keeping the ball of our spirit and the ball of our health in good shape. And it impacts the rest of the balls too. So it's really important. So I'm just going to mention several ways that you can do this. You've got a little handout there that lists them, which you can just refer to later or take notes on, whatever you want. And one of the things I would suggest that, if possible, have a way of marking that time and place. Light a candle, put a prayer shawl around your shoulders. Do something to mark the time and place, that this is different from the rest of your day. Stay still for a while. Just be. One retreat center's brochure says, God isn't particularly interested in what you do on retreat, but rather being with you, just as you are. So that 2-minute retreat or 20-minute retreat is a time to be with God. To be quiet with God. To listen. I read an article several years ago by a young Episcopal priest. And he said when he first became a parish priest, he was scurrying around doing everything that a parish priest is required to do. And he was just getting worn out because every night he was waking up with God talking to him. And he finally said, God, what is it? Why are you waking me up every night? And God said, because it's the only time you'll listen. We need to slow down and listen some other times other than the middle of the night. Take time each day to find that couple of minutes, or that 20 minutes in which you can do this. One way to do this is with a breath prayer. And a breath prayer is just a short little prayer of 6 to 8 syllables. And you can develop your own and then use it to center yourself. So the Hebrew word for breath and spirit are the same, ruach. The idea of the breath prayer is to bring the spirit into your consciousness, into your life. So what I want you to do is think of, first of all, your favorite name for God. And then, what is your heart's desire? So then you end up with a short prayer that you can say with the breath, such as, bring us peace, O God. Yahweh, heal me. Jesus, let me feel your love. What I want you to do, has everybody got a name and your heart's desire in mind? We're just going to do this for a minute and a half. And I just want you to breathe that prayer on each breath in the silence. You can take time in just a couple of minutes to center yourself and bring some peace into your day. Breath prayers are about intention and focusing on God's intention for us. Asking for peace over and over throughout the day. Asking for peace can bring us peace into our life. So if you just take some time to do that. One of the things I've done is on my phone, if you have an alarm on your phone, I have a couple times set here to remind me to do just that. To take 2 minutes for breath prayer. It's not on an audible alarm, it's on a little vibrate, and when it vibrates in my pocket, I know it's time for me to take a little break. Another thing you can do is to take a meditative walk. How many of you take a walk that you are trying to get your heart up and you're just trying to walk as fast as you can, or you're trying to walk as fast as you can to the next appointment? Sometimes you can take just a short walk and be aware of what's going on around you. Listen to the birds. Watch people. Turn off your MP3 player. Take off your pedometer. Just quietly walk. Sometimes you can, we don't always have access to a ladder, but if take that 20-minute short walk, you can walk with a question in your head. Ask God to help with it, and you take that 20-minute meditative walk and find it. You're starting to get an answer at the end of your walk. Another thing you can do in a short time is gratitude. Gratitude is the world's best remedy for anger, resentment, frustration, grief, fatigue, It is God's best remedy. Take time to say thank you. Bobbi just sent. Out of time?
1 minute.
1 minute, 1 minute, okay. You know, our Islamic brothers and sisters pray the hours. There's no reason we can't too, which is part of the reason I have that little timer on my phone. Your handout has a website for praying the hours. There are actually 9 hours time to prayer in the Christian tradition. Choose a couple of them that mean something to you. Take a look at that website and the angels that stand for each of those hours and see which prayer times mean something to you. Choose a word and reflect on it during the day. All of those are ways that will help you just to take 2 minutes out of your day or 20 minutes out of your day.
Thank you, Marcia. And now we'll hear from Carol.
Many of you may have kept diaries from early times in your life, and many of you may have graduated to journals as you've aged. A diary is more of a collection of your story, what's happened to you, but a journal really invites you to go deep, to reflect, and to reflect on the movement of your spirit, reflect on your emotions, reflect on what you're learning from your life experience. I see lots of heads nodding, so I know many of you are familiar with this process. So what are some effective ways of journaling? One is to take moments out of your life that are particularly powerful or relevant for you and write them down and then reflect on them. Then notice what themes you find. Are there any patterns emerging? Where is God in the midst of your dailiness? So just make note of that in your journals. Another technique is to reflect on times of transition. These are the times when we might be going through a big change, a change in job, maybe the loss of a marriage, a divorce, an illness, something that has a large import in your life. Richard Rohr has said that those times of transition, we should hold very closely to ourselves, and we should stay with them for a long time, because those times have probably the most to teach us about life. So again, not only writing them down, but then really reflecting. What is it that's I'm learning from this painful time or this time of joy? What is it that I'm learning about myself? What is it that I'm learning about life? What is it that I'm learning about God and God's presence in my life during times of transition? You could even write your own prayers in your journal at that time as you struggle to talk to yourself and talk to God through your journaling. Another dimension of journaling could be that it comes out of your own meditative practice, whether 2 minutes or 10 minutes or 4 hours. As you meditate, you might ask God, you might ask your soul, what am I longing for at this time in my life? What am I longing for? Where am I being invited on my journey? And as those answers come, and they will, then in your journal, write down what those voices are saying to you. And then use your journal to reflect on that word or that phrase over time. because often that can be a call to whatever is next for you from the deepest part of your being, from your inner core, from your God center. So really, really use that time to reflect on the longings that are coming in your life. And they will change over the years. They're not going to be the same. I'm finding as I age that one of my longings is not surprising for someone who's getting older, which is a longing for divine union. That may happen to you at a younger years, but I think it's much more common as we age. Finally, you can actually bring texts that you enjoy. You can bring quotes that you enjoy. You can draw images in your journal. You can cut out images that are evocative for you and bring them into your journals and add kind of non-verbal or other, imagery or other texts that then you can reflect on in your process of journaling. It makes your journal quite interesting. You may be a person who, like me, hears quotes every once in a while that I go, I've got to write that down. I have to have that. I want to capture that. I don't want to forget that. That is so intriguing to me, and it takes me to an important place that I want to keep coming back to. Great place. Put it in your journal and come back to it. So use your journal not only to record things, but then as a place to come to and reflect on. Okay? So, ideas for journaling. Now I'm going to take you through a process that you may be very familiar with. It's called Lectio Divina, and you should have gotten a handout that looks like this with the circle at the top. The Lectio process is a process of really attending to divine word. That's what that means. Attending to divine word. So the word could be a biblical scripture. It could be Rumi. It could be Hafiz. It could be some of the great Buddhist teachers. Typically in the Christian tradition, we meditate on biblical text, but it could be any text that speaks to you spiritually. I often use poetry, and today I'm going to use a poem that comes from, that evokes kind of our sense of spiritual deepening. Anyway, this is a 4-part process, as you can see on this page. The first part of it is the Lectio is to have a prayerful reading of the scripture or the text. And listen attentively, listen quietly, listen for God in that text. Entering a special relationship with the one who speaks. And I would suggest if you do this with biblical text that you don't read the entire passage, which is often overwhelming and too long. Choose maybe 2 or 3 verses out of a text and just focus on that. Or choose a short Hafiz poem or Rumi poem or short other poem and that can enter you and you can really grasp, so you don't get all caught up in the story, but instead you can get impacted by the words, by the images that come up for you in a shorter text. Then the meditatio time is reflecting on the Word of God, reflecting on, prayerfully considering what in that text at this moment is speaking to you. It may be a word, it may be a phrase. And then you have an oratorio period where you speak out loud the phrase or word that has meaning to you. and then you take that back in and contemplate it again. So I'd like you to close your eyes and just listen to this poem by Denise Levertov called Of Being. And I'm going to read it twice. I know we only have a minute, but the first time I'll just read it and absorb it. The second time I'll read it, and at the end I'd like you to just speak out a word or phrase, just gently, that has meaning to you today. Of being. I know this happiness is provisional, the looming presences, great suffering, great fear. Withdraw only into peripheral vision, but ineluctable this shimmering of wind in the blue leaves, this flood of stillness widening the lake of sky, this need to dance, this need to kneel, this mystery. I know this happiness is provisional, the looming presences, great suffering, great fear, withdraw only into peripheral vision, but ineluctable this shimmering of wind in the blue leaves, this flood of stillness, widening the lake of sky, this need to dance, this need to kneel, this mystery. And when you're ready, just choose a word or phrase that has particular redolence for you today and speak it out.
Shimmering.
Mystery.
Expansion.
And then meditate on why that word may have spoken to you today.
I would invite all of us to take a breath. Breathe in, imagining that your lungs are being filled with the breath of God. And then blow out. One more breath in. Feel it fill up your lungs. Hold as long as you're able and blow out. And one more for the Holy Spirit. Imagining the bottom of your belly filling all the way to the top of your lungs. Hold, blow out. Now we give our attention to Linda.
As the name of our workshop is Being, so as the number of people here exemplifies, there's something about our lives that we'd like to be a little different. And unfortunately, because of the shape of a workshop, we don't get to spend this 50, 60, 70 minutes in a retreat, but we're giving you tools to use in a retreat. And so one of the things that I've noticed at conferences is too many words. When I go to meditate and try to find silence, I keep hearing in my mind, too many words, too many words, too many words. Too many. Whereas, therefore.
Be it further resolved.
So have you been looking for a different way to connect with God? Maybe you've been praying for, you've been praying the same way and connecting God the same way for a long time, and it worked for a while, but now all of a sudden words are just not quite what works for you. That prayer that you might do might be this rote memorized script, and it's really not connecting the way you'd like. When you try to pray differently, no words come. Sometimes it's just thoughts that are racing about work or your busy day or something you're missing in your life. Perhaps you've experienced some significant losses, either through death or economic downturn or relationally. Either way, words are not enough, and you're seeking something new. And you might find or look for something to do with color. Mandalas is a visual connection to the spirit. And what are they? It's not something that just Eastern mystics do. It is something where a time for experiencing color and experiencing movement through drawing. They'll touch the mind, but it also touches the heart. It's a practice that uses colors and shapes that are drawn in a circle, that touch you in ways that might surprise you, ways that are even healing. You can focus on your longing or your loss, pouring into that small circle, and allow the images to speak back to your spirit. And you can find out that it's not about drawing or artistic skill at all. When you learn to do this, even with others, then you also realize you're not alone. That you might even get inspired by the images that somebody else draws or puts before you. One of the things that I experienced when I first studied this was this book on mandalas, and it actually came in a kit. So the kit had paper, which is the back of the book, and it had ways to color on this paper. And then these beautiful images of color on black. And in this book, it just showed different kinds of exercises as well. But what stood out to me was this color on black and how dramatic that can be. Now, mandalas aren't typically just this way. They're often in other colors. And so one of the things you'll find out if you got a handout from me, the back page. And in the back page are some examples. And when we do mandalas as a spiritual exercise, there's two parts to it. And the first part is about listening to what's in here or what we long for. And it's about the drawing, the doing the work. And in that drawing, it's taking whatever colors that call to us and putting in a circular shape. And the circle is a sacred shape. It's sort of that wholeness, and that's why it works as a circle. And just putting in it what comes. And you might not even know what that means, but you're just putting it down there. And you can do this meditatively for about 15 minutes or even a half hour. Somehow you kind of know when you're done. When it's in a group setting, then it's a little more directed. But the other half of this is then spending time putting it down and looking on it and meditating on it, like you do with Lectio Divina, where you're contemplating words and you're contemplating this picture and letting it speak back to you. And that's what's really fascinating. So even say this center one right here, you know, that's not really a picture. There's nothing artistic about that. It's really about colors and shapes that showed up.
Which one was it?
This is the one right here in the middle. And those colors and shape really more expressed emotion, but the emotion wasn't even really clear when they were being drawn. And it was when there were time to sit it down and just spend time looking on it, meditating on it, that all of a sudden some of those emotions stood out. Some of those images meant something. And inviting them to speak back, just like the scripture speaks back to us. And it becomes like a living document. One of the things I do for work, I'm a hospice chaplain. And so I've been able to take this to patients who can't draw, who are paralyzed. They have ALS or something else, and they can barely communicate. And so we've done it together. We've had the circle, and we'll point, they'll name a color, and then a shape, and we'll put it together in this place. And create this picture that's their image. It comes to them in their heart and mind. And then we stick it up on a wall where they can see it, and they get to meditate on it whenever they want. It's left there, it's theirs to keep. It's like a journal without words. And so what I've given you in this handout is how to do it. It has a little bit of history about mandalas. It has instructions on how to do it, the supplies you might need, and then you even how to do it in a group. And as you saw on the bottom of this picture, this is one of the groups. And what we did in the group is we have them on the ground and we spend time letting it speak to us, we meditate on it, and then as people were willing, they would share what they saw in their drawing and what that said to them and how powerful it was. So I invite you, when you are tired of words, to pick up some crayons, some colored pencils, just some chalk. See what it speaks to you. And if you want to know what this is like from someone who doesn't do this regularly, there's a little guy over here who's a friend of mine over here who's done it with me. And Ben is holding this wonderful sloth. So if you find the guy with the sloth, then ask him what it's like, because he did it with us as a group. Okay.
So let's take a moment. And I invite you to close your eyes and pay attention. What are you seeing with your eyes closed?
I'm going to talk about silence and solitude type of retreat. And most of us in my life, I went on retreats as a young person, a youth retreat. I used to go to summer camp for youth through my church. And we love that experience of being on retreat with many people. And those are good experiences. What I've come to in my life is I love those group experiences, but I also love personal retreats of solitude and silence. And you might ask, well, why be in silence? And for me, it's a calling, and it is for some people. All of these examples of retreats are a way to grow closer to the presence of the capital P, to grow closer to God, to the holy, within oneself, within nature, in the colors and the drawing and the journaling, all the way to grow closer to ourselves and to God. And silence is a way that allows me to do that. It means for me not talking, not being in dialogue. And maybe I'll have some music, maybe not. It depends on the location where I'm at, the retreat. I've learned to do it even when I can't go away on retreat. I've learned to do it like on a day off. I'll keep off the cell phone and the radio and the TV and everything for maybe the whole day or maybe part of the day, and just see what comes in that silence. I want to share with you a short reading from this book called Swinging on the Garden Gate by Elizabeth Andrews. She's a spiritual director in Minnesota. She's writing about coming home to herself as a bisexual woman and a bisexual Christian. But she's writing in this section where she's working at a retreat center in Minnesota, and she's the greeter, the hostess at this retreat center. That's her job. And it's a chapter called Woman in a Wilderness. I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs. The doorbell to the retreat center rings late one summer afternoon. I know who it is before I answer it, so I'm on my way. I grab a floppy white-brimmed hat and the key to the hermitage. Miriam has made reservations for a 3-week retreat in a small, single-person dwelling out in the woods. She is changing jobs, moving from the emergency ward of a hospital to the directorship of a large inner-city missions project. We are the silent stopping place in between. For 3 weeks, she will immerse herself in quiet. A long, deep breath in the middle of hectic years. Our responsibility is to nurture her alone time with baskets of warm meals and prayer. Is anyone taking a deep breath about that? I open the door and let her into the one-room hermitage. The building is surrounded by white pine and birch. sun angles through the bay windows and is dappled across the wood floor and the back of the rocking chair. It's a simple room, but Miriam seems to think she's died and gone to heaven. She tests the quilted bed, she goes to the window and reads a small piece of calligraphy resting against the sill. I watch Miriam's back as she reads, suspecting that for her, this inch is familiar territory. There is loneliness in the 3 weeks ahead, and doubt, and the weight of extended silence. She has packed lightly, 1 bag of clothes, 1 backpack of books and knitting. I tell her that I hope she will find solace and renewal in this place. She says, I already have. For the next 3 weeks, I see her daily in the kitchen when she picks up her meals. We don't say much. In this wilderness, she's traveling alone. So I found the practice of silence and solitude. I began it years ago, when I was serving a church in Minnesota, in Anoka, Minnesota. I go out to Claire's Well, which is about an hour's drive, and I just do 2 nights there in a day. And I begin to move into the silence after I arrived, and then the day there, and maybe the next morning before I went back to work. And it became a way to take a deep breath. It became a way, and still is a way for me to come home to myself, to get out of all the busyness of the doing and to just be. And then it helps me when I go back into the doing to balance being with doing. We see this in Jesus' ministry in Scripture, the time he went off to a lonely place to pray. There are many scriptures about that. When I changed locations, moving from Minnesota out here to Washington, I left one ministry and began another one without a break in between. And I'd already read the book on ministry burnout, which is that you don't do that. You take a break in between. And the only break I had was the drive out here and then unpacking and getting started in another job. After 2 years in that second job out here, I left that position because I needed the break. And it wasn't a fit for me. There are other reasons that I left. But in that time, then I had a break of about 5 months, unemployed break. But it was a welcome break, and I did a 12-day silent retreat. So that was a challenge, to go into 12 days of silence. I went back to Minnesota to Claire's Well, the place where I used to just do 2 nights, and I spent 12 nights. I define it, as I said, as no talking. Others maybe will do their silence and have a little bit of talking. You know, you can define it however you want. Sometimes I have music, sometimes not. I talk to God. If there are animals at the retreat center, I often talk to them. Yeah, it's a time when I bring a journal and reading and maybe art materials to draw mandalas, and I walk and I pray. Sometimes I do work at the retreat center. In silence, I'll pick raspberries or pull weeds or do some other kind of work. It also, the silence is moving out the distractions of the cell phone and the radio and the TV and all of that, and the distractions of even dialogue. And it heightens my intuitive awareness, especially my intuitive awareness in nature. So I've had some amazing experiences where I was in this hermitage. It had been raining for days, the wind was blowing, and then one evening the rain and the wind stopped, and I could see out the window that the sky was clearing and there were some stars, and I was journaling, and something told me to go look outside. And I kept journaling, you know, ignoring that little inner voice. And I stepped outside the hermitage, and there across the northern sky were bright red northern lights. So there was some intuitive knowing in me to go outside, and I listened finally. And the red northern lights were in the shape of a Holy Spirit flame. It was an amazing moment. I went back to get my camera, I came back out, and it was gone. So I've had other experiences like that as well. It also deepens the practice of discernment. If you're trying to discern a life question about a relationship or your work or your vocation, the silence can give you opportunity to spend time in discernment. I want to share with you there's a handout you've got with different reading resources, and any of those would be good to take on a silent retreat. I brought along a couple of them. This is called A Retreat with Henry Nouwen. There are many of these that are with different people, like a retreat with Mother Teresa, retreat with Thomas Merton, different theologians and priests and nuns and religious people. And so this has day, you choose a day, you take a day, and you have readings and prayers that are with that day. And this book is called 7 Days of Solitude. It gives you guidance if you want that for 7 days of silence and solitude. The listing of retreat places that is out there if you didn't get one. There are personal retreat locations around the country and locally here. I just want to note that both Pilgrim Firs and in Sinson, Pilgrim Firs has a cabin available for clergy for private retreats. And in Sinson has a cabin available for clergy and spiritual directors. It's a large studio apartment that looks out over a beautiful view of in Sinson. And Mark is here, and he can tell you more about that. Not during the summer, though. Yeah. Either I've taken retreats at Pilgrim Firs in the winter, in the fall, and the spring, but not when the summer crowds are there. Thank you.
So this time I would like to let's take a moment, and we're going to take a deep breath. But this time I invite you to let it out with an okay? So take a breath in. We're going to do that again.
So they can hear us next door?
Deep breath in. And one more time, paying attention on how good it feels. Breath in. We can still hear them, so we're going to turn to Sally now. And she'll share about befriending our distractions.
Anybody here not have the experience of distraction? Because I need to get to meet you, or we need to worship you, or something.
How about so many distractions, they're not distracting?
Which is exactly why we're probably doing this 2 or 20-minute retreat. Sometimes we go from distraction to distraction and don't even realize it. So in these 10 minutes, I want to think of 3 basic things. One is it's important to notice, to get a sense for noticing, oh, this is really kind of a distraction. The second one is have a sense of learning to be curious about what arises. And finally, cultivating that the silence and all these things people have been talking about, and even the distractions, are finally about a landscape underneath and through things that we often don't have that opportunity to tap into. So first, as far as the distraction goes, you know, I don't know about you, but it could be where you're sitting. It could, I mean, if you want to name some distractions.
Clothing.
Clothing, okay, see, would not have thought of clothing as a distraction. And you talk about going on retreats, and sometimes there's food. Sometimes when I've gone on retreats, I have to make food, and then I think, oh my gosh, what am I gonna make next? Or it might be, is it time to eat? Or the things that come up are amazing, that can be distracting. And I was on this wonderful retreat at Pilgrim Firs when there was another group that I had my cabin, but they kept walking by to the meals, and then they'd walk back to South Lodge, and then they'd walk by, and I finally thought, so I wouldn't even call this a technique. Don't think of it as a technique, but as far as noticing the distraction, there's things you can do. One is, first I would say, you can bless. You can simply say, oh, yeah, I learned to bless the people as they walk by, and that kind of thing. So there's kind of a general attitude. I've already had to bless them over there several times. And there's even interior distractions, I would say. Well, I'll get to that in just a minute. But in general, you might want to think of it as a person, these distractions that arise inside of you. You know, hello there. And, oh, hello there, I see you, rather than, ugh, stupid, you know, the things that actually get you tight. Oh, hello there. And then the response can be, you know, I see you, but it could be being honorable and then resisting the distraction. I'll get back to you later. I'll get back to you after lunch. I'll get back to you after this retreat. It might be you think you're just going to write it down, but be careful, don't make big long lists. Even that can be a distraction. But I'll get back to you later. Or it might be attending in a small way. Oh, gosh, I'm cold. Well, you'll just get colder and colder, it's perhaps. So, okay, I'll throw a blanket on. Then, you know, so it might be you want to do something with it. Because finally, leading into the second thing, there might really be information there. This is something that keeps rising up, and you think, wow, what's really going on? What is this really about? I'm not just either running over and over the past or trying to rehearse the future. It may be, it's hard to settle down and settle in because I'm afraid. You know, I'm afraid if I'm really present, well, I'm not being productive. I can't justify my life. Why am I here when there's all these needs in the world? I mean, before you know it, you're in Africa, you're in Syria, you're solving the problems, and you realize you're vulnerable to something in you that says my life has to make sense this way. So this is really the second thing, to be curious about what arises and even see that the distractions might carry information or something important. The phrase that I use is, you're vulnerable. And to see that in the silence, we're talking about silence, that the silence, if you're in a silent or a quiet place, it's giving the inner noise an opportunity to basically come out and say, da 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 da, you thought you had covered me over, you are so wrong. And then to have that same kind of compassionate attention, it's so important because you're getting closer to something that's about you. So here's the personal example I was going to give. So I'm sitting here and we're getting closer to when I'm going to say a few words. And I'm a pastor, you know, I preach. And I have learned that I wear a robe because it's a great way to not have clothing be a distraction. Oh, she wore that last week or the week before. I don't want people to have that distraction. However, I have this self-conscious side that I had thought after 20 years I would be over with. But no. So instead, I learned to say, there it is. I hope they can't see my heart doing da-da-da-da-da-da-da, because it's silly, and oh, I have the need to judge it, and that kind of thing. And what's very, very important is to remember that this is not about success or failure, whether it's the 2-minute or 20-minute or a week. The minute you do that, and this kind of leads to the next thing, I'm not sure if I'm done with this, but which is consider that you are wanting to cultivate something that connects you to the God within, the depth of who you are, the trust that those desires and needs can sort themselves out over time into what is really most holy and most truly you. That whatever the God thing is not about ruining your life or making it harder. It might be harder, but there's an integrating piece going on. And this is really the third thing. You get to this landscape where you think, wow, if I can let go of success or failure, it lets the things I'm not comfortable with talk to the things that maybe I like about myself or that I present to others. That the things underneath, God is with just as much. But it takes, to me, over and over, getting to know, learning to say hello, learning to say, oh, what's that about? And here I am feeling vulnerable. In a very authentic way, where these things start coming together. And that's, even the journaling, I find if I journal, it slows me down. Now, one thing I did say in the church for practice during Lent was, and I'm thinking some of you younger folks might be more, iPod inclined or text inclined, and you feel, when you get a text, does a buzz go off, right? Does something, I'm a really lousy texter. Something goes off. So I used to say, okay, take 10 minutes of just nothing. Can you all try practicing stopping for 10 minutes? So somebody in my church who was very hyperactive and knits during worship said, I did it. I learned to do it while I was driving. And I thought, no. This is not what I mean. But for her, she turned the radio off and had never done that for 10 minutes. And she said, I started to see things that I hadn't seen. And I started to see, I might want to go here someday. Or, I might want to,
Not hit the pedestrian?
Yeah, those kind of things. But I realized it made me think, for 10 minutes it might be, you got a text, if you turn the text, if you say, I'm not going to get the text for the 2 minutes or 20 minutes, and just see what comes up. You might think, wow, I am always having to be, And then you learn something about yourself. Do I always want to be like that? Well, if I'm talking to somebody very important, if they're being serious, they have a concern, do I have that ability to let it go? And to just, hello, I'll get back to you later, and speak to that thing. So I think distractions can be an opportunity. Joan Chittister says, you first realize you go from spiritual mistake to spiritual mistake to spiritual mistake, until finally you realize there's no spiritual mistakes. That's just not even the way to put it. We're all finding our way. And as far as like the retreats or the longer time that we might have, if you think, oh, I really want this to work, I've got the technique down, oh, let's be successful, oh Lord. Thomas Merton says, the minute when you have that, you have blocked out the light of God from having any chance, because your spiritual ambition is kind of saying, this is how we're going to do it. So look kindly on your distractions, get to know them. They will tell you things about life and God, and there's all these different ways that the distractions will come in, but that can help us integrate what comes up. So that's my little bit. So, and I'm so glad you're all here, because we're all different expressions of presence and distraction, except after a while, isn't it all, well, was that a distraction? Or, wow, I learned something there. We find out God is deeper and more beautiful than you could ever imagine. So thank you. And then this is an open time.
And so, as you notice, I have been the transitional piece for us. And so I would like to be distracted from my distraction. And so I'm going to invite us, I've set my little harp to go off in 1 minute. Sally invited us into 10 minutes of nothingness. But I'm going to invite us into 1 minute of nothingness, and I'm going to join you and let the heart call us back. What we're to do now is we want to open from several of the spiritual directors, including myself, in our conference. And now we would like to open it up so that you have a chance to ask questions or to share comments. And the next alarm is going to sound the same as that one, and that is going to invite us to go in peace. And so we have 5 minutes to open it up to comments or questions that any of us might respond together to. Dennis, did you have something?
Well, perhaps, just looking at the population and having had experience in what we're speaking to, it seems that the male gender has more difficulty with any and all of the processes that we've talked about. And I'd just like to open that up for comment. Is it just me, or do I need more practice and less distraction?
May I respond first? No?
Oh, go.
Oh. Well, now water.
I was clearing my throat. I didn't even think about that.
I'm delighted to see as many of your gender in this room, and you showed up. I'm delighted to see all of the people who've showed up. I think that it is an invitation of spirit that we all need retreat, and you're the first to admit it.
And it's interesting, Diana Butler Bass's research on the shift in America that's happening. She's found over the last 10 years, 30% of people in America define themselves as spiritual. And 10 years ago, about 50% defined themselves as religious, 9% as neither, and maybe 8 or 9% as religious and spiritual. In the subsequent years, the 10 years since now, it's totally shifted. Still 9% are neither, and still 30% are spiritual, but not religious. But now, 50% are religious and spiritual. So I think what's happening is a huge shift. The idea of being spiritual in conjunction with being religious has emerged. People are embracing that notion, and I think we're seeing a huge shift. And I'm hoping more and more men will be a part of that movement. I think they are. And seeking to do that, to find inner quiet. So.
Okay.
I was wondering if any of you could address how much structure you take with you to sort of program, because I know that sometimes I've gone and I'm thinking, I have 3 days and I'm going to solve this problem, and but then lots of times I sleep a lot, or it doesn't necessarily happen, and I'm just wondering, do you go into it with a plan of Saturday morning I'll do this, by afternoon I'll be here, you know, or do you just go open?
I think you have to go open. And sleeping is one of the, when you take that silent retreat, you may spend the first 2 or 3 days sleeping. God speaks to us in our dreams. God speaks to us in our sleep. And we are so sleep deprived that to not allow that to happen is to decrease the benefit of the retreat, in my opinion.
I had one very good distraction that happened where I went to this place where we had the apartment at Chelan, and everyone moved out because it was off season, and I said, I'm the only one in this building. And right next door to me came 20, 18 or so something males who played music really loud, and it was the same age as my kids were, so I went into mom mode, and then when the young girl showed up, I was like, oh, I totally should be calling someone. So I spent 3 days processing that, but it turned out to be exactly what I needed to do.
Yes.
It's like, how does someone...
You were honest with it, though. I think being honest, I go in being honest. How much structure do I need? Do not fool myself, do not whatever. And then sometimes I think, I thought I was honest, but actually, and I thought it was, but actually, but you have the time to go deeper into what is true, because we can fool ourselves. It can be about planning. But I think the authentic, it's like, oh, I really do want to work with this until I realize it's working with me.
And it's the same phenomenon when you enter onto a labyrinth for me. There is no right or wrong way to enter into retreat. There is no right or wrong way to be on the labyrinth. allow the metaphor that you find in the time that you've carved out to be with God be God's speech to you.
And
Be surprised by mystery.
Yeah.
And I think one of the traps that I fall into, and I would venture to say that I'm not alone in this, is that notion of thinking that I have to do that work, that it is my work to do, when really it is God's work to do in me. And shifting that perspective is one of those things that I find myself continually needing to do, but one of the more helpful things in my life.
And on that note, we honor the time that you've gifted us. We hope that we've been able to gift you with something new to invite you into creating space in your life for God to speak to you and hold you and nurture you and cajole you and to challenge you and to weep with you and to cry and to laugh with you and to be with you and to travel that great long journey from the mind to the heart, to the world. Go in peace.
Thanks be to God.